You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate in this show to have interviewed some of the world's best athletes, sports people who work in sport across a broad range of disciplines, coaches, trainers, sports psychologists. We also have a segment where we interview some of the most influential people in the field of psychology who've been very kind to share some of the insights. Today, we're we've got three very special guests who are going to give us a really interesting insight into their sort of work, what they do, and also an event they're going to be putting together as well. It's going to be really interesting and some really interesting conversation. Just a few weeks ago, we had a really interesting guest who joined the show. She was a sports reporter and talked about how psychology, having the background in psychology, really helped her become or transferred the skills to being a sports reporter. And these sort of skills are really great. And you know, a lot of us have got an interest in psychology, and whenever we do interviews around the area, it drives a lot of interest. So today we're going to get a really fascinating insight into some of the areas that psychology can be transferred to, and also an event that the British Psychological Society Northwest branch is putting together. So our first guest is Mia Powell. She's the co-chair-elect of the British Psychological Society Northwest branch. Mia, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Hi Jim, and thanks for the invitation, and good afternoon to all your guests and listeners.
Yeah,
it's very exciting to be here. Yeah,
absolutely. It's great to have you on board, and you're doing some great work for the BPS Northwest branch. And you know, there was a time when the branch were doing events regularly, and some were open to the general public, but obviously the sort of the sort of pandemic and the rules and regulations that was put on hold. But now with the things pretty much getting back to normal, whatever normal is, events are back up and running, and I'm sure we'll sort of hear more and see a lot more events in the future. But let's start with this event now, and tell us a bit about the event, the forthcoming event, Mia.
Oh yeah, it's going to be quite a brilliant event. It's actually a project that I started a year ago while I was doing some research on current gender imbalance in psychology, which basically since the 80s has seen more women than men entering psychology. But also after I was reading, Professor's Emeritus Gina Rippon's book on gendered brain. By the way, Gina Rippon is one of our speakers in the event, so that would be great. I felt inspired to action basically this issue. You see, when you realize that focusing on the problem for the last 30 years hasn't changed things much, and we are still having 80% of the applicants in psychology female, really wanted to focus on the solution and the change in the models we offer children and students, which is something that must start early in the education. And education starts really before school. It starts in the family, at home. And if we as families or parents have formed these preconceptions that psychology is not a serious job, or a psychologist is not someone who, or is just someone who reads your minds basically, and is all that bogus, or there is no money in psychology, or is a woman careers, then the message we will pass on to our children is the wrong one. And this is not the reality. But if you don't know this, then it's like, if you never lived in a house, you don't know what is needed, how it functions. You don't know you need a plumber, an electrician if things go wrong, basic things. So it's the same if families or schools are not aware of the impact psychology can make in these young people's life, then change will not happen.
Absolutely.
Now you see, learning happens very fast through modeling. The evolution in technology happens very fast and also works on modeling. as you know, a new plane prototype is built on an older model and such, and it's upgraded. But with people, it's a little bit slower. It takes longer because we are not innate objects. But our vision behind this event is to put new models in front of the children and young students and show them that they can become contributors basically to the future of our world. And instead of growing up spending hours on playing video games, for instance, they could be busy studying what processes in the minds were involved in creating those games, or busy studying the impact these games have on us or on their peers, or maybe studying the impact these games have on the markets they are sold on by calculating, I don't know, algorithms, if they love math, and then producing valuable statistics that impact the industry furthermore. So rather than becoming just, you know, a cog in the wheel, to educate them to become a contributor. So, yeah, this is the vision that I had, and a lot of interest was, you know, sparked amongst my colleagues in the BPS Northwest branch, and then we started putting this event together, and now it's all going to happen. It's become a reality.
Absolutely. No, that's some really interesting insights there. The event mentions employability, and that psychological skills can be easily transferred into a variety of jobs. Can you tell us more about your sort of take on that, please?
It is true, and I heard many preconceptions around what can you do with psychology. Well, there is, like you mentioned before, there is a lot you can do with psychology. But I would say the very first most important thing you will acquire with psychology, you will learn how to reflect, how to think for yourself, how to be curious, and how to trust your judgment. Self-confidence is a very important thing when you start in life and throughout life. A psychology graduate is well sought basically after, you know, nowadays, and I was looking at national surveys of employers, and they all show that they value these graduates over other graduates. Now, the skills that make these graduates so valuable are probably the critical thinking, first of all, an ability to think reflectively and to evaluate things analytically and objectively, and also the ability to handle and work with numbers, with data. So these are very important skills in life. But apart from becoming, let's say, a psychologist and working in a healthcare and, you know, as a practitioner or a researcher, a psychology graduate can use their skills in literally thousands of jobs out there if they know where to look. From media, like advertising careers, for instance, or human resources, in business, in management, in IT, in finance, in market research or government sectors, criminal justice, sports, like you mentioned, in education, in teaching. So basically, it's in every sectors of the society. But then I would like to say that it works the other way too. So these days we see more and more people coming into psychology later in life, and they bring valuable skills they gained in other professions into psychology. So we have people coming from teachings, from arts, from business, and other sciences. So it's never too late for psychology. Now, during our life, change is natural. And one day, for instance, you might feel that all experiences and skills you have gained so far prepared you for a new path. And that career might be psychology. Actually, that was also my case. My undergrad was in philosophy, and it was an excellent degree. Now, philosophy means, in Greek language, the love of wisdom. And that's exactly what it is. But then I have outgrown it, and I felt I wanted to be able to affect change and make a difference in a more practical way rather than just create thoughts and arguments. Philosophy is like, if we pick a topic now, we will still be here discussing it next year without getting to any results. Now, with psychology, it's very different. Psychology is the study of the mind and the behavior, and also intervenes in the mechanism of that behavioral change. It makes a it makes a change. So it goes even farther to study behaviors and mental processes, not only of humans, but of animals too. And maybe it's the only science that is truly concerned with this study, with how human mind works. What motivates some people to behave in a certain way, but motivates others to act in a completely different way. So with psychology, if we choose a topic now, if we have a problem we want to investigate, by next year we will have a couple of theories and probably have them tested, disseminated them amongst researchers and action. So psychology is a curious science, is solutions focused, and it's a good attitude to have in life, to be curious.
Absolutely, that's really powerful stuff, and certainly as you've mentioned there, the value of transferring the skills across a broad range of areas, like you mentioned, businesses, other science, and absolutely, I think that it's never too late to learn, and that's really powerful points you put across there, Mia. So we look at psychology on a macro level. I guess the event, you're sort of pulling all this together and making it available for people to be able to connect with you guys who've got a vast amount of experience between you to be able to sort of share some of these powerful insights. And tell us about how this sort of event reflects on the broadness of psychology.
We designed our event with this in mind, and the speakers we invited will really reflect the broadness and diversity of psychology and how far-reaching it is. It is going to be really interesting. Some of these are, for instance, clinical psychology that focuses on how to prevent and treat a wide variety of complicated human problems like emotional, relationship issues, behavioral, more serious problems like addictions. And then we will have neuropsychology field represented that studies the brain and the nervous system and what happens in the brain and all those complicated processes impact our behaviors, our abilities and emotions, and that is really, really fascinating to study and to understand. Well, and not to mention forensic psychology, the cherry on the top, will show us how basically an entire range of other professions rely and work with forensic psychologists, from police forces, prisons, courts, lawyers. They all rely on forensic psychologist evaluations. And why? Simply because all these agencies, the police, the courts, but not only, we all want to understand offending behaviors, criminals' behaviors, and psychological problems associated with this, and how we can help these people. So yes, it will be very interesting to attend.
Absolutely, and I mean one of the aims of the show is to bring awareness and to people. We aim to make people aware. We certainly, in the sport, from a perspective of sport, we look to increase participation, awareness of different sports, but also our segment of psychology is sort of promoting awareness of the field, and I suppose, generally speaking, you've mentioned there, it's such a broad area, psychology. I think, generally speaking, we can sort of, just from hearing you speak there, the realization of how broad psychology is. Do you think, Mia, that people are aware of that psychology does sort of branch into forensic, neuropsychology, into clinical, into so many areas? Does the event, do you feel does this event give people the opportunity to sort of see, as you've mentioned there, how broad psychology is?
Absolutely. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for not only the young people that are going to attend, but for their educators, teachers, even parents, to acknowledge how all these branches of psychology can overlap and work in unity. Because psychology is so vast, you really needed all these branches to exist. You couldn't have only one branch.
Absolutely, yeah.
Why? Just simply, not because it is something special about psychology, but it's something special about the human being. It reflects who we are, how complex we are. We are so complex that we need all these branches to actually study and examine and analyze all our not all, because we attempt to study all, but as many as we can of our emotions, interactions with others, behaviors, and there are so many levels that we need all these branches of psychology to work in unity with each other. So I think our event will focus on reflecting this, and we are hoping to excite and inspire our young audience.
Absolutely, and just for our listeners who are sort of interested in more details, like what are some of the details around the actual event, sort of the time, or when it will be, and
so the event, first of all, the event is free to attend for everyone. So it will happen on 20th of October, and it will be on Zoom between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. And all we have to do is just register, go on the bps.org events link, and find the event. And the title of the event is My Supermind, Young People in Psychology. And for people who are not members or teachers or anyone who's not a member of BPS, they can just register there. They can just put their names and emails and have an account, and they will be sent a Zoom link to access the event on 20th of October.
Fantastic. No, it sounds really exciting. Yeah, it really is, and I really think I know how much hard work you and the guys have sort of put in to sort of organise this event, and I really think that any school up and down the country, college, university, should sort of compartmentalise some time for the 20th at 1 p.m. till 3, and absolutely, because I think that you've made some really great points about the transferability of psychology, and many good points. We could sort of spend a whole show night speaking about them. So, I really think that it's, not just sort of schools and college, unis, but anyone who's sort of interested to know more really at any point would sort of, get something out of it. That's for sure. But I really want to thank you for coming on board the show. Mia, it's been great speaking to you, and we wish you every success with the event, and no doubt many more events to come. Thank you, Mia.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim, and thanks everybody. I'm looking forward to seeing you there.
Brilliant. You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show, for your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. And our next guest area is executive coaching, and she uses positive psychology amongst, I'm sure, many other things to do executive coaching, which is a fascinating field, and sort of building on some of the discussion that Mia talked about, which is really, really fascinating, and know that you really enjoyed. So, Lorna Mills, executive coach, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Jimmy. It's really important to get this message out to young people, I think. Absolutely.
And you guys have worked exceptionally hard and to pull this together. And I must admit, I wouldn't say surprised. I know your capabilities, but it's just great. It's incredible how hard you guys have sort of worked and turned this around, which is fantastic. And so, Lorna, let's sort of get a bit of an insight in terms of your sort of role and what you've been doing, and your take on psych. Why would you say it's an exciting time for young people to engage in psychology?
Well, I think it's a really exciting time for a lot of reasons. One of the main ones is, we've had such a change over the last 18 months, and everything's moved really quickly. So we're getting a lot of new research, we're seeing a lot of new developments, and the world's changing quite a bit. So I think it's really interesting for young people to get in and maybe tackle new topics and bring their perspective with it. And one of the benefit of joining the psychological profession is that we've got a fantastic community of cooperative people. You know, we've got a great support network. I'm sure you'll agree.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that it's really a great network. So as a parent, I'd love my young people to be involved in that community. You know, it's something that we all need, and it's really important for our well-being and our professional development. So
Absolutely.
I think it's great to pull the young people in.
No, I agree entirely. I think it's fantastic, and you know, it's a great opportunity. A great opportunity. I mean, yourself as an executive coach, you know, for our listeners, and you know, perhaps I want to get a bit of an insight into what an executive coach. Could you just maybe get a bit of an insight into what executive coaching is?
Yeah, sure. So during, I'll give you an example of a project we've done. During COVID, a lot of leaders were flung into totally unexpected situations. So we had leaders from all over the world who had to move on to remote working quite quickly. We had you know, factories closed down, and there was an awful lot of disruption. So as executive coach, we went in to help to support them, not only with the performance of themselves and their own well-being, but with that of their employees, you know, and suppliers. So we train the leaders in various different areas, and we offer them interventions so that they can really not only survive through the challenges, because believe me, well, as you know, it was tough for a lot of them, but actually absolutely. To thrive through them and to support them to build new areas of work.
No, that's fantastic, and absolutely, it has been a challenging time, and I'm sure the effects will probably sort of will be around for a while longer too. So I think, you know, for me, leadership's really resonated in the last 18-24 months. I mean, prior to that, I saw the value in it and how important it was, but I think certainly the adversity of the last 18-24 months or so, it's just really made me realise how important it is that we've got strong leaders. Not necessarily strong leaders, Lorna, it's more people who strategic, like you said, interventions, who can think their way through situations, really, which is key.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the perception of psychology, I suppose it can, I mean, without sort of generalising, I think it can be sort of limiting and narrow amongst, you know, I mean, people's perception maybe is what they see on TV and general, you know, psychology is vast, and we spoke to Mia about this, about how vast it is and how many divisions there is. And tell us about, you know, the perception, your thoughts on that, and what projects people can be involved in.
Yes, well, I suppose traditionally, you know, when I was younger, I saw psychology as the study of what's wrong with us, if you like to use those terms, whereas now it's broadened out, and as Mia's discussed, there's a lot of different areas, and actually there's a lot of interest in positive psychology at the moment, which is really about focusing on our strengths and taking life from just being okay to being great, rather than looking at research that helps people who are struggling to feel okay. So there's absolutely room for both approaches, sometimes alongside each other, sometimes they can be a bit separate, but I think that it's really interesting that this is the way it's moving, and I don't think a lot of people know about it. A lot of people still have the perception of clinical psychology and working with people, you know, who might be struggling, and that's not for everyone. Some people would like a different career, a different focus of the career, so we want to get the message out there. Absolutely,
and I know that's a really exciting event, and sort of, I mean, what are your sort of thoughts on, in terms of, you know, anyone listening, teachers, or sort of, for me, when I spoke to Mia, Lorna, I thought it'd be a great idea for particularly in schools, in colleges, in unis, to sort of on the 20th at 1 o'clock to sort of tune in to see what sort of to watch the event and sort of, you know, get more of an insight into things. What would you say to anyone sort of, I know it's sort of putting you on the spot a little bit, but in terms of anyone sort of considering sort of tuning in, I mean, I think any age, not just sort of, but for anybody sort of considering to sort of tune in, sort of give us a bit of an insight in terms of the event itself.
Yeah, what I think is wonderful about this event is that we've got a range of different speakers from different backgrounds in different areas of psychology, and I think it's a really unique opportunity for young people to see this, and it's all very good reading about the different areas, but when you're actually seeing people and hearing them speak and hearing their stories, it brings everything to life. And I know when I was at school, I was actually actively discouraged from doing psychology at the time. So I personally am quite passionate about showing people what they can do, what sort of exciting areas they can go into, and listening to real people with real stories. And I think that's always really powerful, because you can read it from a leaflet, but unless you see people and hear people and the passion in the voices, I think that makes a really big difference.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I know you've worked really hard to sort of put this together, and yourself and sort of Esmira and Mia have worked, hard to sort of, get this up and running, and hopefully it's sort of, it's something that sort of can continue. Do you think there's a possibility? Obviously, it needs to be put forward, and logistics of it, and with the BPS Northwest Committee and so on and so forth. But do you sort of see this as a possibility, sort of moving forward, as a way, as a means to sort of increase awareness amongst people?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's great potential for this to be an ongoing conversation, and to see what young people need, and listen. The feedback from the events will be really useful as well, and see what are they interested in, what do they need, where are the gaps, where's the information that they need to know. And we're in such a delicate situation at the moment with things like climate change and the diversity questions, conversation, and also digital conversations around that. Young people can make vital contributions here, and for us to be able to have that vehicle to speak to them and to show them what they can do, for me and for the rest of the committee, it's fantastic. So I'm really hoping that people will take this opportunity up and run with it, and it can be part of something bigger, definitely.
Absolutely, completely agree. And I really want to thank you, Lorna, for your time, and give us an insight into what you do and the event, and your take on all things psychology. I'm looking forward to the year, and I think it's going to be fantastic, and I think it's a great opportunity. People can access that in sort of the comfort of their own environment, and have a look and see, and then decide for themselves, really, in terms of what their thoughts are around the area, and to take things forward. So thank you for coming on board. Lorna,
thank you. Yes, we're really looking forward to it. I know the speakers are very excited as well, so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lorna. You're listening to Salford City Radio, 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. And our next guest is going to follow on from Mia and Lorna, who spoke about about their profession and gave us an insight into psychology, as well as talked about the event on the 20th coming up, put together by the BPS Northwest Branch Committee. The main people who put that together in the committee were Mia, Lorna, and our next guest, Esmira Ropaj, who's a trainee clinical psychologist, and she's a recent PhD, so a doctor as well in the area, and she's going to give us a bit more of an insight into the work that she does, and also the event itself. And Esmira, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Thank you for having us, Jimmy.
No, it's really great. I think really fascinating. This event, I think, is really fascinating because it kind of goes out. There's an opportunity, Esmira, for everybody to tune in. I'm going to sort of run it by actually the powers that be when I lecture, and see if I can get my students on the day to tune in. I just think this is such a valuable event. Great speakers and a fascinating insight into the field. Many people want to know the questions to these answers, and sometimes it's difficult because if you're not an expert in the field, it's always best to have people across a broad range of areas to sort of answer some of the questions. But what motivated you to get involved, Esmira? I mean, you're sort of, really busy. You've done your PhD. You're doing some great work. And what was your motivation to get involved in the event?
Yeah, you're right. I'm extremely busy, but I guess for me, my reasons for wanting to be involved with the event is very much kind of shaped by my own professional experiences. So at the moment, I'm training to be a clinical psychologist. I'm a trained clinical psychologist, and kind of historically, clinical psychology hasn't been accessible to those of us who are from Black, Asian, and other kind of ethnically minoritized communities. And so my motivation to be involved in the event is very much all about wanting to I guess, change this a little bit. Because it can always be quite powerful, really, when you are somebody from one of these minoritized communities, have somebody who looks like you, who maybe talks like you, talk at these events and kind of share their own experiences. I'm here, I guess, mainly as a training clinical psychologist, and that's where my experiences lie. But for me, in the past, when I've attended events like this, when I was a student myself, both at college and at university, whenever I saw an individual who was from a minoritized kind of community talk about clinical psychology, it always kind of made me feel, you know what, maybe there is a place for me in this profession. So although training does keep me busy, I try wherever I can to be involved in events like this, in the hope that maybe there is a student out there who looks like me or who sounds like me, who might share some of my experience, and who can kind of look at me and think, you know what, maybe this is a place for me as well, that I do belong in this profession. So I try wherever I can to be involved in events like this, and that was really my main motivation, was to kind of talk to young people about clinical psychology, promote clinical psychology as much as I can. And as you said, psychology as a field is huge, and there is so much more out there other than clinical psychology. So for those who will be attending the event, you'll get to hear so much all areas of psychology, like health psychology, occupational psychology, and it's just an opportunity, I guess, for us as a committee to come together and to put this event just to give young people a bit of information about what options are there out there for them. If psychology is something that they might be thinking about, it's just an opportunity for you to find out what is available to you, and what you can do, I guess, within a degree in psychology, because it can feel a bit like a minefield, and it certainly did to me when I was a college student. Even at university, I didn't have a very clear career path. I didn't have a clear idea of, I want this area of psychology or that area of psychology, because I just loved it all. It was hard for me to decide. I'm very thankful, obviously, for where I've ended up, and I very much enjoy my job. But as I said, within my profession, there are certainly issues with regards to diversity, and I hope kind of events like this, where we're kind of getting out there, really, getting young people to talk about or to hear about different areas of psychology. I'm very keen that with this event we try and reach as many underrepresented communities as we can, because I speak, as I said, mainly from my experience in clinical psychology, but I imagine diversity issues might be prevalent in other areas of psychology.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting you say. I mean, it's fascinating, because we've talked. I talked to Mia and Lorna about sort of transferring the skills, and there's a case for doing and studying, and how transferable these skills are. And yourself, you've sort of gone down the clinical road, and for our listeners, well, at least my opinion, it's not easy. It takes a lot of study and hard work, and so to become clinical, it's you've got to really put the effort in, and you need the breaks as well, I would imagine, to get there. And I suppose there is a stigma around psychology in one sense, in its perception. I mean, I might be generalizing, and it might be different. I think the stigma is out there is probably what people see on TV, Esmira. They sort of see. There's been a lot of films, obviously, that featured psychology and psychologists and so on and so forth as characters in sort of films. But What can be done, do you think, to sort of change the way the perception of psychology is? That sort of perception a lot of us hold that we've probably seen in Hollywood films and other things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. Psychology is portrayed in a particular way within media, and I think certainly there is, from my own experiences, most students will know a little bit about clinical psychology, and actually I attended a careers event recently for undergraduate students at a local university, and when asked about what area of psychology they were interested in, it was very much about clinical psychology, because that's what most people kind of might know about. We talk about mental health problems a little bit more now than perhaps we used, certainly when I was a high school, college student did. And so the idea is that hopefully events like this will give young people a bit more insight into different areas of psychology outside of the ones that might be more popularized by kind of our TV kind of shows and our media, because there is so much more to psychology itself. And I guess from my own perspective as well, I guess growing up, I didn't know anybody who studied psychology, and I didn't know any psychologists, and I guess within my own community, psychology sometimes isn't really, it's not really viewed as much as a proper career. Career paths aren't always really clear, and they tend to be quite complicated sometimes. And quite often, people would say to me, "Oh, you do psychology, that's not a real science," which, by the way, it is, it 100% is.
Yeah.
As you'll know as well, Jimmy.
Absolutely,
I know that when I was pursuing clinical psychology, I did hear a lot of messages from people about how it is hard, especially for those of us who come from under kind of represented communities. And I know that perhaps if there are any young people listening to this who are in a kind of similar position to myself, of not knowing anybody really who did psychology or who's a psychologist, maybe hearing that psychology is not a viable career option, and so on. I think it can be quite difficult to think about psychology as a career, and it can feel quite inaccessible, or only the profession that's open to a select few. And I think events like the one that we're hoping to put together are so important in changing the way we think about psychology, and what there is available to young people who are interested in psychology beyond kind of clinical psychology. There's so much more that can be done with your degree, and certainly we are starting kind of this event series. We're talking to young people about careers specifically within psychology, but as you mentioned earlier, the skills that you gain from a degree in psychology can be transferred into so many other professions. So hopefully, we're starting with careers in psychology, but hopefully in the future we can think about what other careers are available to young people who do study psychology, of which there are many out there.
Yeah, and I think it's quite inspiring, your journey, Esmira. You seem to have focused yourself and decided at some point what you wanted to be, and you've gone for it in a very, very tough field. One, the studies are difficult, and obviously the opportunities can be far and few in between. I would imagine people in terms of being clinical, as well, it's there are abundance of opportunities out there to sort of transfer the skills and do many things, but to sort of go down the clinical road, I would imagine a lot of people. I know you've sort of spoken to sort of schools before, colleges before. Just sort of people go into the industry thinking, I want to be clinical, and then sort of get a bit of a wake-up call in terms of how much work you've got to put into it, and the challenges that Yeah, I mean, certainly, when I was doing my PhD, I worked at one of the local universities, supporting some of the undergraduate students. Most of the people there really that I spoke to did have, a passion for clinical psychology and wanted to pursue that as a career. And I certainly never discouraged anybody from doing that. I think it's a wonderful career. I'm always very realistic with people about how competitive it is, how much work there is involved in kind of pursuing it. But
every year hundreds of us get onto clinical training, so it certainly is doable. And
absolutely,
if there's if you listen to this and thinking, this clinical psychology is something that I'm interested in, I'd certainly encourage you to kind of spend time looking more into the profession and get a real sense of what it means to be a clinical psychologist, because certainly from when I expressed an interest or a desire to want to pursue this as a career, things have changed drastically in terms of what a clinical psychologist does, and what the day-to-day duties look like have changed quite a bit. So I'd say find out a little bit more. If you can get shadowing opportunities, that would be great. But I realise that those require people to know particular individuals within the industry, which can be difficult. So I think coming to our event on the 20th of October, I think that'll be a good start to get a sense of what it is to be a clinical psychologist. We've got somebody who's absolutely brilliant, and recently qualified, so have really good insights into the profession, and what it is like to be a trainee clinical psychologist and a qualified clinical psychologist as well. Absolutely.
I sort of sense the event, has so much potential moving forward. I mean, I think it's phenomenal what you guys are doing, because I really think it gets things out there. And I mean, there's a lot of, in the last few years, there's been more open discussions around mental health, but I still think it's a long way to go. I think that there's sort of scratching the surface, but there's a long way to go in terms of awareness and understanding, and obviously mental health being complex in itself. But I think this is great, this event, because it really creates a platform potentially for the future to put more on, and the sort of to be able to access it in the comfort of people's own homes or classrooms. And if you've got like parents and teachers listening to this conversation now, what do you think would be a good way for them to sort of support a group of young people to find out more about psychology, or who want to maybe pursue a career in the field?
I mean, certainly the first thing would be, if it is at all possible, to support any young person that you might know, to try and be present at our event on the 20th of October. It's an online webinar, and you can find out more details about the event itself and how to sign up on the British Psychological Society events page. Obviously, I realise that not everybody's going to be able to be present at our webinar and kind of be able to access that. So if you have a young person who's interested in kind of doing psychology at university, but might not be particularly kind of sure about what prospects there are for them post the completion of that degree, then I would definitely recommend the British Psychological Society's careers page. And within there, they give you lots of information about the different kind of areas of psychology you can go into. So, clinical, health, organisational psychology, sports psychology. There's just so much out there. And then within that, if you've got a young person who might be a bit early in their education, who might be in high school, might be interested in doing psychology at A level, then certainly have a look at the website, because within there it gives you some information about, what psychology A level might look like, what a degree in psychology might look like in terms of the type of topics that'll be covered. So definitely, come to the event if you can on the 20th of October. But if that isn't something that that you're able to do, or to support a young person to do, then definitely check out the British Psychological Society's careers page for more information.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. That's great stuff. Esmira, I really want to thank you for coming on board the show and sort of sharing some of your experiences and your involvement in the event itself, and certainly anyone listening who is interested in the field of psychology, just a general interest even, just if you've got a general interest to know more, it's a great event to log on to. It's free. You can sort of tune in from the comfort of your own home or classroom or whatever. And I think the beauty is as well the diversity of speakers, and it's great to had an opportunity to sort of hear from just real life people going about their sort of their work and getting a really good insight into it, and certainly for obviously the people who do want to go down the path of being or working in psychology or knowing how to transfer the skills is a great opportunity too. So there's something for everyone to join in, and I want to thank you, Esmira, for coming on board the show, and Mia and Lorna who spoke earlier. It's been really fascinating. We wish you all the very best for the event, and that's great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So there we go. It was we've had a really interesting insight into the world of psychology and the event on the 20th. There'll be a write-up on the link, so you'll be able to access the link as well in the write-up to sort of know more and how to sort of to get on board the event on the 20th of October at sort of at 1 p.m. And it's a great event to get involved if you're an aspiring psychologist, if someone who has got aspirations to be a clinical psychologist, or you just want to learn how to transfer the skills, or you just got just a general overview of what it involves. Perhaps you've watched the program on TV and are fascinated. I know I sort of watch these programs as well, no doubt a lot of listeners do too, and you might want to know more about what the field involves. So thanks again, and Salford City Radio 94.4 FM with your host Jimmy Petruzzi, the Friday Sports Show, bringing you news from the local area and around the world, and with our segment of interviewing some people in the field of psychology, and some of the influential people we've had on the field of psychology on the show give us insights into what they do. So thanks for listening, and hopefully you can get to the event that'll be on the 20th.
You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show. You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show with your host Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. We're very fortunate in this show to have interviewed some of the world's best athletes, sports people who work in football across a broad range of disciplines. We've spoken to top coaches, psychologists, trainers. We also have a segment which we speak to people internationally, international perspectives. We've been very fortunate to sort of travelled or spoken to people at least around the globe. We have a segment on psychology, speaking to some of the most influential people in the world in the field of psychology, who've given us their perspective on mental health and related areas. And today we've got a really fascinating guest who's a sports reporter. She's a sports reporter and presenter for the ABC all the way in Sydney. So we're going back over to Australia again today. And this should be really interesting because a lot of the themes that we've covered on the show, certainly from the beginning, we've sort of aimed to increase awareness and participation of sport. Our guest today is going to speak about inclusion and women in sport, which is something we've always advocated very strongly on this show as well. So, Danielle in Italy, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jimmy, and a very nice introduction as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you've sort of got a lot of experience and have been in the field, so I'm sure there's plenty of listeners, and we have a lot of listeners who are interested in media themselves, and there's a university that specialises in media not too far away, so I'm sure a lot of students will be listening, just trying to get more of an idea of what it's like to be a reporter and presenter. So where did it all begin for you, Daniela? Where did it start for you as a reporter and presenter?
It's an interesting one. I might just go back. I remember when I was 15, I wanted to be a journalist. That was my goal, was to be a journalist. And interestingly, my first work experience job, I was about year 10, so I'd be 14, 15. I got to work for a local newspaper, and I wrote my first article on one of the local football clubs, or soccer clubs as we call them here, and I was just so excited about that. But
wow.
As I progressed, I ended up going to university and studying psychology, because my sister is a psychologist, and incidentally she actually lives in London and works with the NHS. So I just put the journalism dream aside for some reason and studied psychology. I went on and
I graduated with honours at Sydney University, and I had a career as a bilingual psychologist for a few years, which I did enjoy. I'm Italian speaking as well, so it was speaking Italian to clients, or also supporting the families of Italian speaking clients, educating them about mental health, educating professionals about the Italian community, just trying to differentiate the difference between what is culture and mental illness. And then for some reason I just decided I wanted to go back into journalism. I decided to have a career change, so I went back and I studied journalism, and then I got into writing as a psychologist, interestingly about financial stuff, but then I went and did regional reporting, did a bit of sports journalism, and then fell into sports journalism that way. And because of my passion about mental health, it was always something that I wanted to bring out in stories, just not just about performance and about winning, but just about well-being overall. And interestingly, when I started, mental health was still a bit of a stigma of an issue, and women's sport, we didn't even have women's teams. It was quite derogatory. You play like a girl. There was no way to have a football team. The only women's sport would have been tennis at best. So it's been such a wonderful evolution. I've now been a journalist for 20 years, and from where I started to now, it's just to see how much women's sports evolved, and even diversity, just in terms of all the appreciating cultures. Our Indigenous community, we're really trying to have more reconciliation action plans so that we can acknowledge that, and I'm sure that different nations have that as well. With similar to the Black Lives Matters movement. So I think it's beautiful that what I enjoy about sport is, sport's great, and especially during COVID, we have it as a release, but it's the stories behind the sport. It's just what motivates or what inspired a person to get there, and I think that's what draws me personally.
Absolutely. It's really interesting, like your background in psychology, and I had this conversation. I'm on a committee in the northwest of England as well, in psychology, BPS, and I had this conversation how psychology is a really great transferable skill. I guess in one sense I can relate to yourself, Daniela, where I sort of decided in the end, there were other things I wanted to pursue rather than work as a psychologist as such. But I still appreciate the transferable skill. Do you find that's the case for you? We've got listeners as well. The show, after it's aired, I share it as well to the BPS Northwest Facebook page. So there'll be listeners there. And do you think, in your sort of opinion, your experience, that psychology has been a really transferable skill for you in say life and just other professions as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. Because on so many levels, not just on how to deal with people. Obviously, as a psychologist, you need good listening skills, because the listening skills is what helps you engage, and the person you're interviewing, or the talent, it makes them realise, you're listening to me, you're hearing my story, and their barriers go down as well, and you can get a really good story because they know that you're genuinely listening. But on the other end as well, it's also about how you deal with people, because working in media and other organisations, you can work with very difficult people, and especially it's getting better now, but when I first started working in it as a female, I really struggled with a lot of egos and, dare I say, some people with slightly psychopathic personalities who were very powerful. And, you can identify that, and having the skills to deal with it. Certain times, though, even though I could identify it, I didn't keep my mouth shut, which probably wasn't was good and bad in some respects. But on two ends, I guess, there's skills on how you deal with people, just your workmates, your managers, your bosses, and also how you deal with the people that you're interviewing. And not just that, sometimes you've got very negative. You've got stories that can be controversial, and you've got to have a way of approaching it that makes it feel that you're not necessarily attacking somebody, but you're being impartial, and you want to make sure that you are providing both sides of the story, or that you're hearing someone out.
It's really interesting saying. I guess the sort of challenge is sometimes there's certain things that happen in the world, and I suppose we've all got sort of a moral stance on things, and how do you sort of find, being in? Does that come with professionalism and experience, or is it something that? How do you?
It's interesting. Well, it's funny because you've got to juggle it. In some respects, you have to be impartial and you have to just report the facts. But I think, there's an old saying, sport and politics don't mix. Well, no, they do mix, because we need sport as a tool to make change. And sometimes we have to, if we see something that is wrong, then it is our job to say this is not right, this is discriminatory, this is sexist, this is racist, and obviously you can't just go out and accuse somebody, but there are, if you hear something on the mic and something comes out, well, there is an obligation to say something. Or for example, what's happening in Afghanistan now with a lot of the female sporting teams, the female athletes, they need a voice again. We can't just ignore that. So our job as female journalists is to speak up for them, because who isn't going to? So that is sport and politics.
Yeah, absolutely. But it takes a lot of strength, Danielle, to do that. I mean, because I guess in a sense, I mean, especially with sort of social media now. Years ago, there wasn't really social media. If you said something, it was. But now, if with social media, if